They said the new volunteer medic was quiet, nothing special, just another single dad trying to make ends meet. But on the night the base lost power, and the GP tent filled with wounded Marines, he stepped forward with a calmness that didn't belong to a nobody. And when a joking Marine asked him what rank he thought he was, the man's soft reply made every person in that tent go silent, and realize they had been standing next to someone far more extraordinary than they ever imagined. The GP tent smelled of antiseptic, wet canvas, and exhaustion. It had been a long week of field exercises, and even though it wasn't a combat zone, accidents happened, sprained ankles, heat casualties, a broken wrist here and there. The Marines filed in and out, some laughing, some cursing, all waiting to be patched up by the overworked med staff. In the corner, quietly folding gauze like it was the most important task in the world, sat the new volunteer, a single dad named Daniel Hayes. No one knew much about him, except that he lived off base with his daughter and worked night shifts at a warehouse. He barely talked, barely made eye contact, but always showed up early and stayed late. The Marines didn't mind him. They liked quiet people who worked hard. But they also didn't know what to make of him. He moved like someone who carried old weight, pain he didn't talk about, memories he didn't share. Still, he cared for their wounds with a gentleness rare in military spaces. Some joked he must have been a nurse or paramedic before life forced him into obscurity. But no one asked directly. Everyone has a story. Not everyone wants to tell it. That night, a sudden storm knocked the power out across the base. The GP tent flickered under backup generators, humming unevenly, and the winds howled like a warning. Training had gone wrong for a nearby platoon. Their Humvee had overturned, and within minutes injured Marines began pouring in. Chaos swelled. Corpsmen scrambled for supplies. Flashlights bobbed over bloodied uniforms. Fear showed on faces that normally masked everything. Daniel didn't hesitate. The moment the first stretcher arrived, his calm presence cut through the panic. He moved with startling precision, checking pulses, stabilizing necks, barking short but steady instructions to Marines who weren't used to taking orders from volunteers. His hands were steady, too steady, and his reflexes too fast, almost like he had done this many times before, under far worse conditions. One young Marine, bleeding from the brow but smiling anyway, watched him work. "Damn document! You're smoother than half the medics here," he said, laughing through the pain. "Hey, what rank were you anyway?" A few others chuckled. It was meant as a joke. A harmless poke. Everyone expected Daniel to laugh it off. Maybe say he was never in the service. Maybe shrug and say, "No rank at all." But he stopped. Just for a moment. His hands froze, not in fear, but in memory, like the question had opened a door he'd kept sealed for years. The Marines noticed the shift. The tent, busy as it was, seemed to hush itself. Daniel exhaled slowly, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he looked the Marine directly in the eyes. And with a voice soft but unmistakably authoritative, he said, "Lieutenant Colonel, United States Marine Corps." The tent fell still. Completely still. Even the generator seemed to quiet itself. No one moved. No one breathed. A volunteer single dad had just revealed a rank that outranked nearly everyone present. No one knew what to say. The Marines stared, trying to reconcile the quiet man folding gauze every morning with the officer who once commanded hundreds. It didn't add up. And Daniel could see that confusion on their faces. He didn't blame them. He barely recognized himself anymore either. The young Marine, the one who had asked the question jokingly, suddenly sat straighter even though he was still on a stretcher. "Sir, I didn't mean." Daniel held up a hand, gentle but firm. "Relax. Tonight I'm just Daniel. Just a dad helping out." But the truth had already taken root in the tent. Even the corpsmen looked at him differently now. One of them, a senior NCO, approached with hesitation. "Sir, if you were a lieutenant colonel, why'd you leave the Corps?" The question pierced deeper than any wound he had treated. Daniel swallowed hard, feeling the storm outside echo inside him. He had spent years practicing how not to think about that day, how to keep it hidden behind routine, silence, and the small joys of raising his daughter alone. But in the middle of the dim tent, with Marines watching him like he'd suddenly become someone they needed to understand, he realized the truth might actually help them. Maybe even help him. He took a seat on an ammo crate and spoke quietly, not for dramatic effect, but because the memory demanded softness. My last deployment, we were hit hard. Lost good men. I made the call to go back for a trapped unit. Saved most of them. He paused, breath heavy. But not all. The tent stayed silent. Not out of pity, Marines understood the weight of responsibility, but out of respect. My daughter was 3 at the time, he continued. When I got home, she didn't recognize me. She hid behind my wife. His voice cracked slightly. I realized I'd given everything to the Corps, except to my family. And when my wife passed 2 years later, I promised myself I'd be present for my little girl. Not half a father. Not a ghost walking through the door. He rubbed his hands together, grounding himself. So I left the uniform. Took warehouse jobs. Odd shifts. Anything that let me be home when she needed me. He looked around the tent. Volunteering here, it just lets me use the skills I still have, without taking me away from her again. For a moment, no one spoke. They didn't see a former lieutenant colonel. They didn't see a warehouse worker. They saw a father who had carried more pain than he admitted, and more strength than he realized. The wind outside roared as if applauding him. Finally, the young Marine nodded slowly. Sir, you didn't freeze tonight. You didn't panic. You led us. Even now. He swallowed. Once a Marine, always a Marine. The tent murmured in agreement. Respect replaced curiosity. Gratitude replaced jokes. By the time the storm passed and the last Marine was treated, Daniel felt lighter. Not because the night had been easy, it was one of the hardest since he left the Corps, but because for the first time in years, he allowed someone to see who he truly was. As he stepped out of the tent into the cool, rain-washed air, one thought echoed in his mind. Not of war. Not of loss. But of his daughter, asleep at home, dreaming peacefully. And he whispered to himself, Everything I do, it's for you. Inside the tent, the Marines watched him go, silent with a new understanding. They knew they wouldn't forget the night the quiet single dad revealed the truth, and froze an entire GP tent with nothing but a softly spoken rank and the weight of a lifetime behind it.